Good afternoon. Let me put this up a little bit. Thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Matt Power again. I'm with the Maryland Department of Planning. So we're a statewide planning agency within the state of Maryland. And it's a little bit of an oddity. There are not that many state planning agencies in the United States. There's about a handful of them. There's no federal parent agency for us. So for most of you familiar with government, there's the EPA, and then you have a State Department of Environment, and you have Interior, and you have a State Department of Natural Resources. In the planning world, there's no such sort of animal. So even at the state level, we're a little bit of an odd duck. And so we were so excited to get the invite to come here today. And we kept thinking, okay, what is our tie-in? We have some tie-ins to urban ag. We have some tie-ins to broader planning policy. And I was just so encouraged sitting here today listening to all the presentations, because the truth is there are just so many dozens of tie-ins between what we do and what the folks here have been talking about today and the outcomes that you're trying to seek that we're also trying to seek. But if there's one sort of theme that ties it all together, and why I feel so at home here in this group today, is really just about thinking long-term. As a planning agency, one of our roles in government is to sort of get other agencies to think on 30 and 50-year timeframes. So we're sort of that constant wet blanket to people of saying, okay, well, that's great, you can get that done, but you need to be thinking more long-term. You need to be thinking a generation down the road. If any of the stuff that we do in the planning world is really going to matter, you're not going to see it tomorrow. You're going to see it 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now. So if there's a propensity in sort of the corporate world to look quarter to quarter, I would argue that the problem in the government sector is we tend to look term to term, right? So you get elected, it takes you the first year to figure out what you're doing, and then the second year you really start hitting your stride, and the third year you really know what you're doing, and then you're running for re-election. And you're like, okay, all right, well, we need to hold back a little bit. And then the second term, we're really going to knock it out. And then you get your second term, and in the first year, you're getting your stride. In the sixth year, you're going, and then all of a sudden, you're boarding on lame duck. So you really, and if you get 8 years, you get about 2 years where you really have a stride going and can make things happen. So in our agency, a lot of what we do is really, if there's one theme to it, it's land use. Okay, so we're always looking at the land use throughout the state. We're sort of a 30,000-foot agency. We're able to track the trends in the state, see what's happening. And one of our principal roles in the state is to sort of serve as a constant reminder that what happens on the land impacts the water. That's pretty simple, right? But it's incredibly complex at the same time. It's an ecosystem. It's very complex to make that happen and to understand how that relates to the impacts of the Chesapeake Bay, to meeting the Bay TMDL, and just to the way that we live on a daily basis. In the Mid-Atlantic region, people were not used to thinking about water. We're not used to thinking about we might have a scarcity of water. I love the chief's comment earlier. I'm going to steal that quote for like every presentation that we give. We think about it a lot. I mean, having clean drinking water. If you ask your neighbors, most of the people in the state of Maryland never think about what happens when they actually get water out of their faucet, how that came into their house, or what happens when they flush the toilet. They don't get, whether it goes to a sewer or septic, or what happens to the rainwater that falls off the roofs and down the driveways in the storm drain. If you ask people if that, most people tell you that's treated at a wastewater treatment plant. No, it's gushed right in most of your rivers. That's the way it happens. And so we're trying to make those connections on a variety of different policy arenas. So we get involved in school construction, transportation planning, land preservation, historic preservation, heritage tourism, and just what we do is sort of overall coordinate smart growth, sustainability, whatever you want to call it, whatever the term of art is of the day, we're on it. Maryland is a leader in smart growth, and we would argue that smart growth is sustainability, sustainability is smart growth. So the one thing I want to tell you about today is an effort that we've been working on for about the last 4 years, and that's called Plan Maryland. And this was really a pretty simple concept as well, which was just to develop a sort of statewide land use plan, a statewide business strategy for investing wisely our tax dollars in infrastructure investments. So the reality is we don't have the money to sewer the entire state. We don't want to sewer the entire state. We don't want the state to be one huge sprawling megalopolis. It's a beautiful state with its own incredible unique assets, from the mountains to the beach to Baltimore City. We have some of the best assets in the nation, and we want to make sure that the way that we grow is a sustainable way to grow. And we want to make sure that the way that we grow on the land doesn't kill the Chesapeake Bay any more than we've already killed it. The truth of the matter is most of the things that we're seeing happen are decreases in negative trends, right? So we're not like seeing the big get healthier and healthier. You can say we are in one sense, but the reality is we're just killing it less slowly. And it's going to take a lot of the changes we've been talking about today and thinking long term in order to reverse some trends that have been a long, long time moving in the wrong direction. So one of the biggest tie-ins is when we started this effort to come up with a statewide land use plan, one of the most sort of vocal things that came out at all these citizen hearings we met with 4,000, 5,000 different citizens in dozens and dozens and dozens of public hearings, and one consistent group kept coming up which was saying, what are you doing about food policy? What are you doing about food deserts in Baltimore City? How are you addressing these issues? How are you making sure that there is an ability to get locally grown organic food? And it was, quite frankly, one of the things that was so consistent that we had completely ignored in what we were doing, because the planning community is way behind on this issue. So we started working to incorporate it into our statewide development plan and figuring out ways that we can encourage longer term thinking to make sure that our centers do have the ability to produce inside the urban centers. And we also separately are working on a different document to give best practices to local governments. So we're sort of 30,000 foot. Most of the raw like zoning, permitting, and development review happens at the local level. But sometimes one county doesn't know what the county right next door to them is doing. So we're trying to collect all the best practices from around the state so that we can get them and give them ways that they can start thinking long term and incorporating food policy into their comprehensive plans that are looking at transportation networks, that are looking at water use, that are looking at water reuse, that are looking at gray water use. And so that's something that I think is a great tie-in, and I'm just so encouraged to see that there are so many other people involved in the overall effort. One of the things that I'll say sort of on the just intriguing side is we sought out to do this plan because we thought it made practical sense, we thought it made business sense, we thought it was a good use of taxpayer dollars, and it has been an incredibly controversial endeavor. It has divided rural against urban, it has divided Republican against Democrat, it has divided state against local. Because when you start talking about what you do on the land and what the impacts are, and you ask people to step up and do more and be concerned about more than just themselves, it turns into a very tense conversation very, very quickly. So I'm just incredibly happy to be here. I feel like I've learned a tremendous amount already today, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you so much for having us.